Hi, Andrew from Psych, and welcome to video number 9 in our 12 video sequence on neurodiversity in the workplace. And this one is specifically about candidate selection techniques, which can be effective in ensuring that the person that you're about to hire, neurodiversity or neurotypical, will be appropriately recruited and can do the job that you've got in mind for them. Now, there is a world of science on candidate selection, and it looks like this. Typically, the methodology is that people have been assessed on a range of different things before they're hired, and then down the track, let's say 1 year later, you assess whether they've been successful or not in their job. And what you do is you run a mathematical process called a correlation to see whether the things on the left are able to predict the things on the right. Now, the things on the right can be quantitative measures of success. So, for instance, if it's a sales role, that might be dollars billed, or if it's a manufacturing role, it might be numbers of widgets or whatever. Or it can be qualitative, which could be things like supervisor rating of outcomes, or it could be 360-degree feedback from colleagues on how the person has gone in the job. It also could be measures of failure. So that would be, for instance, quantitative measures of failure would be a count of documented bad behaviour events, or a qualitative measure of failure might be supervisor or colleague ratings of negative behaviours. Now, this kind of research has been done all over the world and in thousands of different studies, literally thousands. And the reason is that it's expensive to hire the wrong people, and it's also really good to not make mistakes and to have people come up to speed in their jobs very quickly. And so what you see here is a diagram which lists the effectiveness of various recruitment methods. So on the left-hand side, you have recruitment methods. And on the right-hand side, you have this thing called validity with a little r, and that's a correlation coefficient. The higher the correlation coefficient, the stronger the relationship between what you used to assess a candidate before you hired them and the ultimate success or failure of that candidate once they came on board. Now, you'll see a couple of things about this diagram. You'll see things down the bottom are things that have very weak correlations. And what that means is that they're not very successful for predicting whether people will succeed or fail. So age is not a good predictor of success or failure at work. But the things at the top of the list are, in fact, things that can be demonstrated to be accurate predictors of success and failure at work. You'll also see things like integrity testing and personality assessment are shown to be accurate predictors. And as you can see in the top 10 or so recruitment methods, all but one has a strong psych testing component to it. Now, people ask me all the time, should you psych test people who are neurodiverse? And my answer is emphatically yes. Using evidence-based methodologies, and psych testing is about as evidence-based as you can find. Using psych testing as part of your recruitment method, I'm going to say, makes it far fairer because it doesn't have the intrinsic and implicit biases that human beings often do. One of the things I love about psych testing is that it can screen candidates into a process. Yes, it can screen them out, but what if you have a short list of people and this candidate doesn't look great on paper for whatever reason, and you psych test them and they come out with fantastic scores on some of the things that are really important to the job, let's say particular forms of cognitive ability. Well, maybe that candidate leaps to the front of the queue or close to it by virtue of the fact that now you know that they're really smart. Even if their interpersonal style might be a little unusual or something like that, this can cause you to see strengths that the person may not be able to easily demonstrate in another process, like an interview, for instance. So if you're interested in trying psych testing, you can use this QR code to access a free trial. How about interviews, though? Interviews are, of course, used very heavily in recruitment, and you have to be careful with your interview process if a person is neurodiverse. Firstly, institutionalized discrimination against those who lack social confidence, may be alarming for some neurodivergent people. How big is the panel? Panels are often between 3 and 5 people. If you have a lack of social confidence, for whatever reason, neurodivergence or something else, then it may well be sitting in front of a panel of 10 eyes looking at you, or 6 or however many. That can be a very daunting experience, and it can cause the interview not to do what an interview should. An interview should not be about the interviewers being impressed. It should be about getting at facts in the person's background to use those facts to judge whether this person is likely to be able to deliver the outcomes of the job and whether they have the capabilities necessary to do the job. And so what that means is that you should focus on the past rather than the future. And what I mean by that is that people ask interview questions in 2 forms. One is this kind of behavioural interview question. please give an example of where you've done that in the past. That's a good question. The worst form of question is, imagine the following. What would you do in the following circumstances? That tends to pick out good interviewees rather than good candidates. Eliminate stress as much as possible. I think most people understand that. But look, the truth of it is, the stress of an interview is nothing like the stress of doing a job. They're completely different things. Neurologically, they use different parts of the brain. So having a stress interview is in fact a bad idea. But then one of the things that we strongly recommend is you send the questions to the candidates before the interview and let them prepare. So you can imagine if a person has a form of neurodivergence and you're ambushing them with questions, well, you're really not playing to their strengths. Let them think of their best examples before they come and then interview them about those examples. That's what good behavioural interviewing is about. Panel preparation. One of the most important things in making a panel work is to get the panel together to talk about the questions that they're going to ask, but to specifically agree what constitutes a good answer. If you do that, what you end up with is higher, what we call in psychology, inter-rater reliability, where the panelists agree with each other. Because one of the things we know about the mathematics of accuracy is that if the panel disagrees with itself, it can't possibly be valid. Valid means it's going to predict what goes on in the real world. So we strongly recommend that you get the panel together, talk about what the questions will be, but also to agree as much as possible what constitutes a good answer. Have a simple scoring system, and that will maximize the probability that your interview approach will work. And then finally, reference checks. Reference checks are notoriously inaccurate. And you see I've quoted the figure of 7% accuracy here from the earlier research I showed you about the effectiveness of different recruitment methods. You should use them, but don't rely on them massively. The number of times in my life I've had people ring me and say, well, look, we've psych tested this person through you and these results are no good, but we've reference checked them and they're wonderful. Then 6 months later, they're coming back to us saying, I wish we had obeyed the advice from the psych tests. Look, they're worth doing, but they are far better where you're asking about the past than about the future. Questions like, would you rehire this person? That's a sentiment question. If the job requires the writing of high quality reports that satisfy the recipients of those reports, the best interview question for a referee is, can you give me an example of where this candidate wrote a report and you had really good feedback on it? I mean, that's the competency that we're trying to find. So there are some ideas about recruitment of people who come from neurodivergent backgrounds and more generally as well. The next video in this sequence is about leadership of people from neurodivergent groups. So are there leadership techniques which work better with people who are neurodivergent? Well, in fact, yes, there are. And if you click on the link near this video, you'll find out what they are and how to do them. If you find this content helpful, then like and subscribe.